Hey everybody, this is the epilogue to Matthias Küntzel's Nazis and Islamic Antisemitism and the Middle East. Why do many Muslims hate Jews? Felix Klein, the German government's anti-Semitism commissioner, gives the following answer, quote, although anti-Semitic propaganda has roots going back centuries, anti-Semitic propaganda's causes lie in the present. Anyone who is able to live contentedly in, accepted by and integrated into the host society has little reasons to join movements of the frustrated and embittered that call for the hatred of others, end quote. Felix Klein. The cause and effect schema that Felix Klein uses here is attractive because it seems reasonable and promises a solution. If the causes of the frustration and bitterness disappear, then so will hatred of Jews. It would be nice if it were true. However, it does not work as an explanation of anti-Semitism, as a brief glance at history shows. 6 million Jews were murdered without there being any such, quote, reason, end quote, for it. When the mass murder pogrom began in 1941, everything was going splendidly for the Germans. It was not a time of frustration or bitterness. And what about anti-Semitism in the German majority society today? It exists also among those who are, quote, contented, as we all know. Felix Klein applies his cause and effect schema to Germany. It is even more frequently applied to Israel. If the Palestinians could live, quote, contentedly and, quote, accepted in their own state, so it is said, they would have no further reason to hate Jews. This idea is endlessly repeated because it appears logical and reasonable. The Israel cause the Jew hatred effect. In reality, however, even if Israel disappeared, anti-Semitism would remain. The very existence of the 1937 pamphlet, Islam and Judaism, which repeatedly refers to an essential hostility between the Jews and Islam, proves the idea that disproves the idea that Arabs would get along with Jews after a victory over Zionism. Even then, the pamphlet's Arab version explains, Allah will, quote, break their spines, end quote. 72 years later, Muslim religious leader Muhammad Hussein Yaqub came to the same conclusion. Quote, if the Jews give us back Palestine, will we then begin to love them? Of course not, end quote. He declared on the Egyptian TV channel Al Rama TV, quote, we will fight, conquer, and destroy them until not a single Jew remains on earth, end quote. Muhammad Hussein Yaqub. Wikipedia says Muhammad Hussein Yaqub is a Salafic Islamic scholar in the Arab world who has given hundreds of lectures in Dawah. A number of his books are currently being published. Back to the text. Here Yaqub expresses the quintessence of anti-Semitism is a pure projective hatred, a delusion that takes possession of people regardless of what Jews do or do not think, and regardless of their actual material situation. Yaqub's idea of killing Jews, quote, until not a single Jew remains on earth, end quote, is not to be found in the Quran. 100 years ago, no Muslim religious authority would have thought of saying such a thing. What we are dealing with here is a late echo of the Nazi propaganda. While we cannot precisely measure its impact on Arab thinking, 3 things are nonetheless clear. First, from 1937 onward, the Muftis faction and their German friends pursued the goal of instilling Islamic anti-Semitism on a mass scale. Second, From 1945 to 1948, Arab leaders repeated many of the anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist slogans that had been disseminated by Radio Season in the immediate past. Third, Jew hatred is particularly prevalent in the regions that had once been subject to the waves of hate from Season. In 2014, the Anti-Defamation League released a study showing that 75% of Muslims surveyed in the Middle East and North Africa agreed with anti-Semitic statements. In parts of Asia the Season had never reached, the figure was 37%. In post-1945 Bosnia-Herzegovina, too, where the radio propaganda was not available during the war, anti-Semitism has been far less prevalent than in the Middle East, where it had. Everything supports the view that the years of relentless propaganda made a huge contribution to the creation of mass anti-Semitic consciousness. And not only that, the few years of exposure to Nazi ideology brought about a long-lasting change in the Arab world. To this day, the anti-Jewish passages in the Quran are incessantly repeated here. To this day, the same course of events is interpreted through the lens of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And to this day, the Palestinian Authority views every attempt to normalize relations with Israel as high treason. It is, of course, true that fundamental positions have always existed in the Zionist camp, too. They have, however, remained socially marginal, unlike in the Palestinian camp, where many of the Mufti's instructions remain effective. So in 2018, the current Mufti of Jerusalem refused a Muslim burial to a believer because he had allegedly sold a piece of land to Jews. In doing so, the Mufti referred explicitly to a fatwa issued by Amin al-Husseini in 1935. Al-Husseini was never a mere tool of the Nazis. As an active partner of the Germans, he was extremely creative. Indeed, al-Husseini played a decisive role in the formation of Islamic antisemitism. It was he who, in 1938, pressurized Berlin into setting up its Arab language broadcasting service. This shows that a substantial proportion of the Palestinian Arabs were involved in what happened between 1939 and 1945. Today, there is no conspicuous worship of the Mufti in the Palestinian territories. Only one school, the Amin al-Husseini Elementary School and El Birey, is named after him. Nevertheless, the Palestinian leadership remains committed to his legacy. Yasser Arafat himself extolled the Mufti as a hero whose soldier he had been. His successor, Mahmoud Abbas, has referred to al-Husseini as a, quote, hero and, quote, pioneer. In July 2019, Mahmoud al-Habash, one of Abbas's closest advisors, posted a photo of the Mufti on his Facebook page and praised him as a leader and example. So long as the Palestinian leadership adheres to this tradition, peace is hardly possible. Once, however, we accept the fact that Nazi propaganda made a crucial contribution to anti-Semitism in the region, then our view of the Middle Eastern conflict has to change, because then it is not Jewish settlement blocks, but Palestinian ideological blocks that present the biggest obstacle to a peace settlement. Then the Jew hatred in the region can no longer be dismissed as a kind of local color. Then, in the manifestations of anti-Semitism that are spreading from the Middle East into Europe, we look into the grisly face of our own European past. Did everything 1945 point inevitably to the 1948 war? Not at all. Another course was possible that would have spared both sides much pain and grief. Let us do a thought experiment. If the Egyptian government had banned the Muslim Brotherhood not in December 1948, but after the anti-Jewish outrages of the 2nd of November 1945, 3 years previously, the Brotherhood's subsequent pro-Mufti campaign might never have occurred. In that case, the Egyptian government might not have felt obliged to hoist al-Husseini back into the leadership of the Palestinians. Without the Mufti and the Brotherhood, it would scarcely have been possible to whip up the mass war hysteria against the UN partition plan. If Egypt and also the Arab League had stuck to their original reluctance to go to war, there might have been no flight or expulsion of the Palestinian Arabs. Then, perhaps in 2023, we might have been able to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the establishment of a Palestinian state. As we know, history took another path, not because it was inevitable, but because the Arab world, including its elites, allowed itself to become infected by Jew hatred instead of resisting it, accommodating Jew hatred rather than opposing it. This pattern has already marked Allied behavior in World War II. Thus, the British government did all it could to avoid giving the impression of sympathizing with Jews. Quote, even the fact that the Nazis were persecuting Jews was to be kept as far as possible secret, as likely to awaken Arab sympathies for the former, end quote. Remarked Arthur Küntzel in 1949. The USA adopted the same tactic as we have seen. After 1945, the West maintained this approach. To this day, it does not want to know too much or even anything at all about anti-Semitism in the Arab world. Thus, in 1990, the call by Herbert A. Strauss, the Jewish founding director of the Berlin Center for Research on Anti-Semitism, ZFA, for, quote, the Arab Islamic world to be included in anti-Semitism research, end quote, fell on deaf ears. The center continues to ignore the Hamas Charter, which has never been taken into account by German politicians. Accommodating anti-Semitism rather than opposing it, history shows where that leads. Nevertheless, German foreign policy remains ambivalent precisely where a clear stand must be taken. Germany is always, quote, for the security of Israel on the one hand and the legitimate rights of the Palestinians on the other, end quote. A junior Foreign Office Minister, Niels Ennen, has stated, quote, every attempt, Niels Ennen goes on, quote, to shift the balanced German and European position to the advantage of one side is essentially problematic, end quote. Balance rather than commitment, ambivalence instead of clarity. It seems that Berlin, too, does not want to be seen on the side of the Jews. In a debate on banning Hezbollah, Roderick Kiesewetter, a leading member of the CDU/CSU group in the Bundestag, defended Germany's, quote, more balanced position as mediator, end quote, that would be endangered by such a ban. This reminds me of a well-known cartoon by A.F. Banco in which Benjamin Netanyahu and a grim-looking Hamas cadre sit facing one another. In the latter has a paper with the words, quote, death to all Jews, end quote, in his hand. In the middle sits the, quote, mediator, former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, addressing Netanyahu with the words, quote, could you at least meet him halfway, end quote. Quote, balance and the, quote, mediator position are not appropriate when it comes to anti-Semitism. This is especially true in the country that once initiated the Shoah and did its utmost to whip up Jew hatred among Muslims too. The partiality called for by Thomas Mann in 1941 is needed once more today. Quote, who is not against evil passionately and with their whole being against it is more or less in favor of it. End quote. Thomas Mann. That's the end of the epilogue. Thank you so much for listening.